Okay, so now what we do here is we take our understanding of government spending and we try to talk about, and this would be really the key Keynesian innovation, we talk about what the government can do to move an economy to a preferred position. So to do that, we just need to talk a little bit more about how the economy can exist, right? And that as we draw this out here, right, that if I put real GDP on the x-axis and I put the price level on the y-axis, that we can understand aggregate demand as being downward sloping again, that we can have the short-run aggregate supply be upward sloping, and that if the economy is in its long-run equilibrium point, so this would be long-run aggregate supply, short-run aggregate supply, and aggregate demand, this economy would be in equilibrium. But that isn't always the case, and that's kind of the, so Keynes is both developing this model, but then he's also saying that there are times aggregate demand, aggregate supply, where the economy could be here. And so if the short-run equilibrium is to the right of the long-run curve, this is called an inflationary gap. Or alternatively, if the equilibrium is to the left of the long run, then we're going to call this a recessionary gap. And what John Maynard Keynes basically tells us is that in this kind of situation, you have two kinds of policy. You could have a fiscal policy or a monetary policy, and or both. What you would want to have done here, and this is just kind of giving you a preview of what you're going to see here, what you're going to want to have is either, for instance, you'd want the government to either tax more or reduce taxes, or both. So this would be called expansionary fiscal policy. And by doing that, it's going to shift the AD curve to the right and get us into equilibrium. Why? Because remember, in the aggregate demand is C, I, G, and NX. And now the G is higher. Sorry, I can't fit in the NX, but there you go, right there. Fix my thing here. But essentially, again, what you can have here happening is that with expansionary fiscal policy, you can move the economy faster into equilibrium. And over here, you'd actually want to shrink the economy. So here you're going to use contractionary fiscal policy to move the economy faster out of this inflationary environment. If you don't intervene and try to fix things, then the economy would only very slowly move to equilibrium. So Keynes allows the economy to still go to equilibrium. It's just going to happen a lot more slowly. Now there's a trade-off. It's faster to use this interventionist policy of expansionary or contractionary policy, but the consequence of it is that you've got permanently different prices. In the case of the expansionary fiscal policy, you now have permanently higher prices, even though the output is the same. Okay, so most of the time here, we're focusing on the fiscal policy that comes from the demand side. Man, that's a lot of old white men. I don't know what else to say. And I say this as a white man. That's a lot of old white men. I'm not passing any judgment. I'm just saying. Um, well, I'm not trying to push. I just take back whatever I said. That's a very. What do I worry about when I look at a picture like that? I worry that everyone has very similar opinions. That's what I worry about, I guess. And I don't like that kind of environment. It's very, you're not having a conversation. People are just talking and you're all in agreement. So there's no real healthy debate. Anyway, enough of that. Enough of me saying that. You can look at the fiscal policy from two standpoints. You can either look at it from a spending standpoint, that would be the demand side, or you can look at it from a supply side, that would be the taxation. Typically, Democrats and those who are more liberal try to look at the fiscal policy from the demand side, and Republicans typically focus on things from the supply side. Supply side is all about changing the tax rates to either encourage people to work more or less. And the spending side of it would be is that the government spends more money or less money to replace people spending money if they're not spending enough. So fiscal policy. It is anything where we talk about the government spending or taxing money in an attempt to adjust how that money is spent. So again, if the government spends more money, that's expansionary. If they tax less, that's also expansionary. It typically, though, does lead to government deficits. Contractionary policy, dude, if you see it going on, I'd be happy to see it. I just don't see it happening very often. Now, what's being lost in the debate that we're having right now, again, this is March of 2025, so if you're listening to this in 2026, my comments right now might seem quite dated. But here in March 2025, we're talking about the government trying to reduce spending, primarily through Trump and either reducing how many government workers there are or whatnot. The consequence of that would be is that it does slow the economy down. So I'm not sure why people get so worked up about the economy possibly slowing down if we all agree that the government needs to spend less money. It typically a good politician, at least who wants to be reelected, typically doesn't actually do anything to reduce government spending, primarily because they want to get reelected. And you don't get reelected if you're causing government workers to lose their job or the economy to slow down, typically. Again, doesn't always happen that way, but typically we'd want to see that. So again, what we would see here is, at least for expansionary fiscal policy, there's two ways to pursue that. The two ways to pursue that would be you either increase the government spending, which is increasing the G, or you're decreasing taxes, which in turn will increase consumption. And again, you would do it because you're at point B. You're in this recessionary gap, and you're wanting to move to point A. So you're at B and you're wanting to move to you're going to move to point A. I'm not sure why they are, this looks incorrect. Am I missing something here? There's usually they write some notes here. Let's just see what they say in the notes here. Well, that ain't confusing. Jeez. Those are confusing notes. I don't know why they are doing that to you. I'm going to change this here. Let's say the economy is at point B. That would be a recessionary gap. And then what you'd be talking about doing is increasing government spending or reducing taxes, which will shift us out from AD2 to AD1. And we'd be now at point in the letter A. So we go from B to A. If you do nothing, meaning you don't do the expansionary policy, go over here. If you do nothing, then the economy moves slowly from B to C. A and C represent the same level of output, but as you can see, we did it faster by just jumping from B to A, but the trade-off to the speed is the fact that prices are permanently higher at A than they are at C. So there's our trade-off. This is a perfect way to look at 2020 with COVID. COVID pushed the economy pretty quickly and pretty swiftly into a recession. That would be point B. And we fixed it incredibly fast by flooding the market with a lot of money, a lot of spending. Moved us from B to A. Some would even argue, perhaps, that we overspent, that we actually moved it way out here. That we moved from a recessionary gap to an inflationary gap. Did it really fast, but we had higher prices. We certainly saw that in 2022, 2023. Then, oh yeah, I remember this. Oh man, that was so great. Yeah, you got money back in 2008 with the Economic Stimulus Act because of the financial crisis. Everyone got money, and the idea was you were supposed to spend that to help stimulate the economy. Yeah, tax rebates don't generally work out the way you want them to work out. Yeah, people just end up usually saving the money. They don't usually spend it like we want them to. Again, look at that picture. That would be, again, a lot of old white men. Again, no judgment, just saying. Then you've got, this would be the Obama administration. So then you've got Biden as the vice president. Also with the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. So here the idea was the government was going to spend a lot of money. So that'd be things like cash for clunkers. That was a good one. That was, if you had a really junky car, you could trade it in and you got like a bunch of money for trading in your old junky car. People just got checks for spending money. And again, that was the intent. Now, take a look at that amount. That's 787 billion, 168 billion. So that comes close to about $1 trillion total between 2008 and 2009. In the coronavirus, COVID, the CARES Act that we had starting with Trump and then Biden increased it. If my memory serves me right, that ended up being like $2 trillion or $3 trillion. So a lot more, basically. And by this point, in 2020, dude, I've got a big family, my wife, dude, it's a lot of money. We got a lot of money by having a lot of kids, and that was all under the COVID CARES Act. Now, I did my patriotic duty. I spent my money, but it turns out not a lot of Americans did. They saved it. And so then they spent that down in 2022, 2023. And so they spent it eventually, but that caused in part the inflation that we saw. And what we're seeing here as well is that as the government is spending this money, that it's increasing the amount of the deficit. And as these deficits are increasing, we saw in the previous chapter, the deficit's increasing, the debt is increasing, and we obviously have to pay those kinds of bills eventually. And again, we just saw this on the previous slide here, so I'm not sure you need to see this again. But obviously, we have a growing deficit that grows even larger during these recessionary time periods. But even during good economic times like 2015, some deficits still did exist. Now, here would be the situation where you would want to have a contractionary fiscal policy. So the idea here is that here the economy is in the inflationary gap at point A. And what you would want to do is increase taxes or reduce government spending. So you'd want to do this contractionary fiscal policy. And so what that does is it moves us to B. So that'd be from AD1 to AD2. And if you did nothing, you'd go eventually from A to C. But it would take a lot longer. So here you actually have a very strong argument for intervention to control the inflation that exists at point A. It's just really hard politically to get reelected when you're saying that government needs to spend less and tax more. So again, you may agree or disagree with what, this is as of March 2025, you may agree or disagree with what the Trump administration is doing, but right, if this was the reason, if Trump or the Republicans were to make an argument and say, high inflation caused, let's say during the Biden administration, was caused by the government spending too much money, we need to spend less and tax more. They're not making that argument, but if they did make that argument and they did do those things, that would actually be a good thing to move us from A to B. There would be harm. There would be unhappiness. But that's sort of like eating your vegetables. It's not like you want to do it, but you need to do it to live a longer life. That's what you'd want to do here. Again, I don't think that we're actually at point A, nor do I think that the Trump plan is actually to reduce G as well as increase T. But if those were all true, then it would be a good thing. And they may be that they're true, and I just don't know it. I don't know. So again, when you look at this data here, and we looked at this before, but I want to look at this again here just very briefly. We already looked at this, but I'm showing you this again. look at this again, how the economy changed here. From before the Civil War, we used to have an economy that was shrinking for almost a year and a half and then growing for almost about 3 years. And look what we've done now. We've gotten it where the economy is growing for 5 years and is only shrinking on average for less than a year. And that's in the post-World War II era. How have we managed to make the economy business cycle one where the economy is growing for such a longer period of time? Well, the answer to that is that with Keynesian theory, we've been better at using this counter-cyclical fiscal policy, where we do an expansionary policy during a recession to get us out of that recessionary gap, and we use a contractionary policy during an expansion to cool the economy down, and to do it so that we can basically grow in a more consistent fashion for a longer fashion rather than it growing more erratically. Right, and so we make the we minimize the height of the peaks and the low point of the trough. We make it a bit more consistent, at least in its growth. The consequence, again, to this is the budget deficit. It does cause these changes in the budget deficit, which if you only focus on the budget deficit numbers, you might get overly concerned. In some sense, that's the consequence of managing an economy. Okay, I'm going to pause here for a second. Now, part of what's happening as well is that the government is spending money, let's say, to stimulate the economy, to help the economy grow. But that's actually not the only thing that helps the economy grow. It's the idea that as well, when the government spends money, people spend that money at stores, and those stores hire employees who then spend their income. As one small example, if a person is receiving, let's say, food stamps, let's say a single person, I think the max is about $400 a month. Well, the government's spending $400, right, to help that person buy their food. But then what we're seeing again is that the person goes to a store and they spend, they buy the $400 of food, which obviously helps the food manufacturer keep their employees. And even if you're just going to Walmart or Dollar General, which are like the two big places that people go to spend food stamp money, those stores obviously hire a lot of people, or even Costco or Sam's Club. They hire people that come and are spending their food stamp money, which then helps those employees then in turn spend the money. So that's that's our multiplier kind of in effect here working. And so what we need to do is we need to find out what that marginal propensity to consume is. That would be how much consumption changes based on, for instance, our change in income. And we typically see that this marginal propensity to consume typically is about 80%, that people spend about 80% of their total income. Okay, so in this case, if people spend 80% of their income, then this would mean that, let's say, for instance, that the consumption goes up by 800 when the income goes up by 1,000. That would give us our 0.8. Because then what we're going to do is we're going to use that MPC that we've just calculated to find what the multiplier is. And that's going to be like 1 minus 0.8, which would be 1 over 0.2, which in this case would equal 5. So that means then that for every change in government spending by, let's say, $1 translates into GDP changing by $5. One of those dollars being a dollar that the government initially spent, and then the rest increasing from consumers spending that money, the $4. And again, what you're seeing here is this, again, we can trace it here. This goes over a series of rounds. So you see this argument a lot, this multiplier idea. You see this a lot when the government is going to spend a lot of money on something like a big building project. Here in Hawaii, we had that conversation about building the skyline. We're having that conversation now about building a new stadium. The idea is that the government will spend the money to build a new stadium, and then that money spent the workers that helped construct it will spend the money, and so on and so forth. On the mainland, we certainly see that argument as well in big government projects like the building of roads. You see that one a lot with the building of roads. Even in something like my industry of higher education, you see that certainly too with the amount of money that you're going to spend on colleges and universities. So we don't always see that fiscal policy is a good thing. It doesn't always work out the way that we want it to, primarily because of three problems that emerge: time lags, crowding out, and saving shifts. So let's talk about each of these. One of the big problems, probably the biggest problem, is time lags. That it takes time to recognize that there's a problem. It then takes time to come up with a solution to that problem, and then finally it takes time for that solution for it to have an impact on the economy. The general estimate is that it would take some 2 to 5 years with fiscal policies. That's a bit usually too long to fix anything. Even with things like these COVID policies, we really saw the inflation in 2022, a full 2 years after the COVID money was approved. And that's part of the problem, right? I mean, a lot of that money really didn't come into effect and really get spent, until 2 years later. The only other thing you can do is you can try to reduce the implementation lag and impact lag by, just giving people money and having even fewer restrictions. But then you have to worry about waste and just overspending money. You can get rid of these time lags instead by having automatic stabilizers. That would be things like food stamps, unemployment compensation, Medicaid. The idea is that you can get rid of the recognition and implementation lags if you just tell people that they get more, more people will be eligible for those programs as they lose their job and whatnot. And the government doesn't need to get involved to spend that extra money. The other concern that we sometimes have with fiscal policy is that we also have crowding out. This happens when, for instance, if the government spends more money, then it means that people might spend less money of their own. So, for instance, I take my kids to the library every week. And generally speaking, I don't really find any books or things that I want to do. But when I went Sunday, my kids were picking out their books, and I went to the DVD section, and I saw the movie Twisters, right? The second Twister movie, Twisters. I was like, dude, I was gonna pay money to see that on Amazon Prime, on Amazon, but Now I don't need to. I just checked it out myself, and I watched it last night. It was actually pretty good. Well, see, there we go, right? In this case, government spending crowded out my private spending, right? If there was no police department, maybe I'd hire a personal bodyguard or something, right? I mean, we could, kind of go through all these things here. Rich people that live in California and face wildfire risks, their insurance companies sometimes hire private fighters. And again, you see that kind of crowding out happening here, which would mean that the amount that we shift aggregate demand by isn't as large as we would have thought that it would have been. Now, what we also see is a critique by the new classicals. And in this, do I really want to do it? You know what? Don't worry about this part. I'm not dismissing the critique. It's just that I think it's going to complicate our discussion of this. So you can skip slides 34 and 35. Now, instead of the government just spending more money, so look at this from the demand side. Instead, what we could do is look at this from the supply side. And so if we looked at this from the supply side, what we'd be doing is we would primarily focus our attention on taxation. And the idea would be is that we want to increase, we want to shift to the right, the long-run aggregate supply function. And we do that by basically encouraging people to be more productive, for companies to expand their spending, and thus the economy grows. And as the economy grows, we do things like, encouraging businesses to invest more, so we would lower corporate taxes. We would encourage people to borrow more money for investments, so we'd have lower marginal income tax rates. And we could give money to people to invest in research and development, R&D. All these things we do, but obviously, if we are, if we want to encourage people to do these things, we need to give them an incentive to it, which would be reducing the taxes that they have to spend for that kind of money. So there's a picture of JFK. That would have been from the 1963 reduction in the marginal tax rates from their high. I guess it's not hard to look like a guy who reduces taxes when they're 94%. Generally speaking, lots of politicians want taxes to go down. But the search really is for that optimal tax rate. That's the hard thing to find. Are taxes too low, too high? We don't actually really have definitive evidence of what that number should be or what it ought to be. So again, this is part of the reason why I don't focus a lot of attention on politics, because I don't know what the right answer is. I haven't heard of anyone knowing what the right answer is. If we did, then we would just make it that amount, I would hope. There was an economist in the 1970s who, the story is told, went to lunch, and on the back of a napkin drew this. And his name was Arthur Laffer, and this is known as the Laffer curve. He was at the University of Chicago. And his basic argument was that the tax rate was too high. He actually thought we were somewhere in region 2. And the idea was that what you could actually do is by reducing the tax rate, you could increase tax revenue. And really the debate between Republicans and Democrats is whether we are in region 1 or 2. We don't really know. Again, I haven't seen any evidence to say which number which region we're in. We think, and this is hard to say here, there's a lot of evidence to suggest that this Laffer curve does exist. So I don't immediately agree with those who say that, all of this was politically generated. We have enough evidence, at least from 1980 to 1991, that does suggest that this is true. But again, I don't see any clear evidence of where we are at on the Laffer curve, whether we are in region 1 or 2. Okay. Well, actually, let's just see. Just out of curiosity here. Let's just type this in. Now, this study, at least from 2011, which is pretty old, would suggest we're on the left-hand side. You can see, though, it is controversial. We can even look in this AI overview and see that it's controversial. Oh, they renamed it. Oh, that's kind of cool. What'd they name it? Now they call it taxable income elasticity. Jeez. I don't know why they did that. I kind of like the old name. It's easier to remember. Okay. Well, there you go. Okay.